Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squad for boxing news and views from around the internet. Mark Breland, the former assistant trainer to Deontay Wilder, has again spoken out in public, this time on a social media, on Instagram, posting a lengthy statement. And this comes in response to Deontay Wilder responding to some comments that Breland himself had made in public on a YouTube interview in recent days. So he said a number of things over the course of an hour. Sort of the interviewers, Deontay Ajayi and Spencer Fearon, sort of drew out information, different quotes, but the totality wasn't necessarily that flattering to Wilder. And Wilder responded in kind in another interview with a different YouTube channel, blasting Mark Breland, saying all manner of things, a bit ranty at times, but putting it on Mark Breland and saying a few things quite personal too. So Breland now, sort of this statement, not so much a clearing of the air, but a setting things straight, revealing some things about his relationship with Deontay Wilder. 3 pages here, which we'll get to. I'll read through the statement, a couple of comments and questions which I'll raise throughout, but we'll crack into it. So Breland, he says, and I'll get to the right hand side first. So he says, I'm no social media expert, so this was the best way to put up my whole caption. So in the statement proper, now you can call this the official Mark Breland Speaks. I've had enough. I'm going to say some things here that was reserved for my autobiography, and bracket, still by the book, there's so much more, end of bracket. I'm also going to add a couple of pics, one quote from a Daily News reporter where he says the usually reserved Mr. Breland is often quiet unless it's something he's passionate about. So true. And this is one subject that has me very passionate, actually beyond passion. So I'm not giving nobody this interview. I'll use my own platform since I've been opened like a can of sardines. On the last podcast I was a guest on, damn, they couldn't even wait till the next show to talk about me. I went on that show with them following my request of no Deontay talk. And so this is this interview with Spencer Fearon, Deontay Ajayi, the YouTube show that they had. And about 20 minutes into their interview with Breland, they started on the Wilder stuff. So at first they talked about Mark Breland, his career, what he'd done as an amateur and pro, etc., before moving on to the Deontay Wilder stuff. So if he had agreed in principle to go on there, no Deontay talks. It's a bit, I guess, disappointing that he was, because it was, live effectively, it was recorded, and, obviously he had to answer those questions. But I guess he could have maybe been a little bit firm in sort of saying, I don't really want to talk about this. But he did go on to say a number of things over the course of an hour, which he was on that podcast. So, make of that what you will in terms of he could have probably said, look, I don't want to go into this any further. He did kind of give off that vibe at the start, sort of saying, I wish him all the best and all that sort of thing, and that's probably enough of that. But obviously they kept sort of pressing him at different points. He continues, but when you've been holding on to something for so long and you're pissed off about it, obviously anyone can push your buttons and all kinds of shit may come out. But that's not the environment I would have chose to speak on. So here's Mark's take. I'll start backwards from the podcast I just did. Anyone who thinks I meant I can beat AJ or Deontay's opponents now at 57 doesn't require a response. At my age, the only fight I'll have is one for my life. I ain't getting hit no more. I've had my share of fights. And just in terms of what he said on that interview with Spencer Fearon and Deontay Ajayi, he did actually say that he could beat some of Deontay Wilder's opponents. So seemingly claiming this is a misquote, but he did say it, so make of that what you will. So he continues, as a fighter with a little experience, I'm speaking on what I see. I stand by my words that the skill set and boxing IQ I see on AJ and many other fighters that my former fighter have fought would not get past a few rounds with me if we were in the same era and weight class, obviously. So that distinction he did not make in the interview. Maybe he thought that was implied, but it wasn't the way that it came off. So he says, as far as saying Deontay Wilder is done and I'm done, I meant with each other. I don't have no idea of where that man's career is going, and I'm not interested in trying to predict his career. Well, some of what he was saying and the way it was couched, it certainly left sort of no sort of other conclusion that he said that Deontay Wilder is done. And that's been interpreted since that interview by all sides. People who are fans of Deontay Wilder and people who are detractors of Deontay Wilder, as a statement that Wilder is done, that Mark Breland said that his career is done. So, I mean, there is a few things here that seems to be he's walking back a few of his statements. So he says, the facts are that my time in the coach position with the Bronze Bomber changed drastically in the 12 years since I started with him. When he turned pro, JD's called me in and humbly stated that he needed a trainer for a great prospect that he had at his gym. Boxing goes like this. You walk into my gym, I train you, I found you, and sometimes I manage you too. So Jay was seen as the head trainer in the media, but I was the only one on the team with a boxing resume, and I was the only trainer. This was okay with me because of my humility. I didn't have to be the one in front of the camera. I've lived that life. After Deontay became a name in boxing, new members joined the team, and it got to the point where I don't even have my fighter's phone number. I haven't spoke to Deontay alone in years. The things that I told Deontay to do had to be ran past Jay. And I guess I'll just sort of go back to that. He hasn't had Deontay Wilder's phone number in years. That's, a pretty concerning situation. And it kind of seems like he's implying that he was isolated to some extent from Deontay Wilder. And for what cause and what reason? Unclear. Maybe Dees was threatened by Mark Breland, his presence, his knowledge. I mean, hard to say. Or perhaps if you're to believe what Wilder was saying in the few years running up until the split, that there were some people telling him to get rid of Mark Breland, to fire him, that Deontay Wilder had outgrown him. So I guess people will sort of debate and sort of go over those sorts of points and look at the situation and go, what's really going on there? But the fact that he was training him in close proximity for a number of years and didn't have his phone number for a few years before they split, that's an interesting situation. And perhaps it's the team dynamic, and as he sort of alludes to, there were new people that came into the team. Maybe they were some sort of spanner in the works that put Breland on the outer. That's one maybe possible conclusion you can draw. So he continues, the things that I told Deontay to do had to be run past Jay. Deontay had become untrainable. He was at the point of, he knows more about boxing than all of us. So teaching a correct jab was not a priority to learn once he continued on his knockout streak. And that sort of statement there from Breland does confirm what he has been saying, or he's been saying that Deontay Wilder fell in love with his power, that was the right hand or bust sort of mentality, and for quite some time. So, I mean, I guess if that's the case, if Deontay Wilder didn't want to learn, hadn't wanted to learn for some time, did believe he knew more than others, I guess you could question, as Deontay Wilder sort of has and others have said, what was Breland's value. But it kind of seems like Breland himself at some point thought that he was a bit of a spare wheel. And this sort of also confirms that as well, because despite him wanting to teach him, wanting to instill things in him, Deontay Wilder was not really willing to be a coachable student. Continues, so a coach can only teach someone if they're willing to learn. We would wait for the champ hours before he arrived at the gym, and Jay would inform us of his mood. If he'd had a bad day, would have to be quiet to not be on the receiving end of his, in inverted commas, his wrath, according to Jay, in an effort not to be, inverted commas, fired. And yeah, hitting the bag, jumping rope and running is not high on the list for him, so if you don't feel like it, he don't. And Jay didn't seem to understand the importance of those things, so he would make it clear not to ask Deontay twice. And this sort of reiterates what he's said in public, Deontay Wilder's training habits, but also alluding there to Deontay Wilder being quite a temperamental character, having mood swings and potentially threatening to fire people if obviously he was in a bad mood, and who knows what could happen. That's the implication from what Breland is saying there. And I guess from what we've seen, different statements and other bits and pieces, I mean, it's clear that Deontay Wilder is an emotional character at times, and we've seen his ego on display, bruised ego on display in the past year or so. But, he is clearly temperamental and prone to mood swings from what Breland is saying. So he says, if I tried to pull Deontay Wilder to the side to tell him what I see, Jay made it clear, don't say nothing, you don't want to make him mad. I've watched this man, Deontay, speak to many people very disrespectfully, and although I'm extremely humble and calm, I'm a man first. I stayed on the team because I've been there from the beginning, and I believed with his power and willingness to learn more, he could be a force in the sport. I never thought anything this insane could take place. I should not have to address who had the water because that accusation is so asinine. It doesn't deserve a reply. Anyone who knows a tiny bit about boxing knows we're tested before and after a fight, so that's the end of that ludicrous allegation. And just on that, there have been some Deontay Wilder fan channels claiming, because on the interview with Spencer Fearon, etc., that he didn't sort of categorically say, I didn't put anything in the water. He couched it as JD's had the water. So his implication was clear that he had nothing to do with it. But some channels have been running some sort of bizarre narrative saying that he didn't deny it. But clearly he did. But now he is outright saying it's a ludicrous allegation, that it's an asinine claim, and that it's ridiculous. He goes on to say, and then there's the gloves. To say that I say, that's the one time I'm glad Jay treated me like I didn't matter. So he does all the head trainer aspects, the witness for the hand, and then sort of it cuts off there. So perhaps he meant witness for the hand wrapping. And that is something that he did point out in that interview he did with the YouTube channel, that he wasn't the one that witnessed the gloves, it was JD. So I think he's thinking, why is he getting the blame for some elements that potentially JD should be potentially taking the fall for? Remembering Mark Breland, he was the one that threw in the towel. Deontay Wilder had said never throw in the towel, but also at the same time, he may have saved him some serious permanent damage because he actually showed a bit of care for him. Anyway, I mean, it's quite an interesting statement. It doesn't necessarily go all the way into some of the things I guess we'd like to know more about, but he is saying had nothing to do with the water, didn't have the water. It's a ludicrous allegation, as he puts it, but also that he had nothing to do with the gloves and that the witness for the hand wrapping was JD's. But an insight there into a couple of different times that Deontay Wilder is apparently quite difficult. But also, obviously, a theme coming through there is Mark Breland is saying that Deontay Wilder can be very disrespectful and that he can be very temperamental, that he has mood swings, that he turns up at the gym hours after he's expected, and that there's the threat people may be fired if they say something that he doesn't like. So it does sound like he's a difficult character. But in terms of Mark Breland and the statement, so obviously he gets to say it in his own words. It sort of sets the record straight on some things, clarifies others, but also there's some open questions as well. But what did you make of it all? Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.